Okay, welcome to a special edition of the Lovecraft Easing podcast. I've got a lot of guests today. It's just me with a lot of guests, no co-panelists. Nadia Bulkin, she's here. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We're going to talk about Why Didn't You Just Leave? A Kickstarter and anthology to be. So, and then we have Krista Carmen. Joe, I didn't catch your last name.
Koch.
Okay. And Susan Palumbo and Julia Rios. And apologize if I'm not saying any of your names correctly because I haven't met you guys before, but I look forward to diving into your work. So let's do introductions first, and then we'll talk about the anthology. Krista, let's start with you. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Krista Carmen. I'm a horror writer. I live in Westerly, Rhode Island. I've been writing horror for about 10 years now. I have a short story collection that came out a few years back called Something Borrowed, Something Blood-Soaked, and my debut novel is coming out. I just found out that there was a slight pushback in the publication date, so it was supposed to come out in October, but is now coming out very early December, called The Daughters of Block Island. And I like to write a lot of Rhode Island-based horror. So yeah, that's who I am.
Well, of course, all of you are here because you have a story in the anthology. Why Didn't You Just Leave? What's your novel about? And when did you say it's coming out?
It's coming out December of this year, and the novel is about two sets of sisters. The whole thing takes place on Block Island, which, if you're not familiar, is a very isolated island off the southern coast of Rhode Island. It was actually inspired by a murder ballad where sisters are two-timed by the same guy. But it is very much like a modern Gothic, meta-Gothic, where the main character is a little unstable and thinks that she might have found her way into an actual Gothic narrative. And then the later main character is her sister, who tries to unravel why she in fact thought that and whether or not there were outside forces trying to convince her that she was in a novel to sort of take advantage of the situation.
Wow, that's a really interesting premise. That's
Thanks.
great. Yeah,
I'm excited for it.
One more time, the title?
It's called The Daughters of Block Island.
The Daughters of Block Island. Okay, I'm definitely going to pick that up. That's a very interesting and different premise.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Joe, what about you? You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Joe Koch, author of The Wingspan of Severed Hands and The Cuvade, and a collection that came out this year called Convulsive, or maybe it was last year. I have a new book out, which is just a self-published limited edition chapbook called The Shipwreck of the Cerberus, and had a lot of short stories published, primarily working in short forms and novella forms.
Do you have any copies of the chapbook left?
I do. I'm about half of them sold out right off the bat, which blew my mind. But there's like 100 left. So yeah, I've got some.
Where can people pick those up?
Just from me directly. On my social media, I've got the link published, or you can go to my website, which is horrorsong.blog.
Horrorsong.blog, just like it sounds?
Yeah.
Okay.
And same as my handle on Twitter.
And I'm assuming Amazon or elsewhere for the collection.
Yes.
And what was that title again?
Convulsive.
Convulsive. A lot of people who watch this show, and their main complaint is, faux complaint is that I add to their TBR. So I try to keep doing that. That's why I ask for the titles twice, because they're usually scribbling with their pencils to write down titles. So what about you, Susan?
Hi, I'm Susan.
And you build Legos.
Yeah, I have Lego. I'm into Lego. I always find these things so awkward. I'm Trinidadian Canadian, spec writer. I tend to write dark fantasy and horror, though I do write other things. I co-founded the Ignite Awards with LD Lewis, so we put out those awards every year. My short story, Laughter Among the Trees, was nominated for the Nebula, and
That's
this
awesome.
year, Dwen, which is a Caribbean, Trinidadian folktale retelling, was also nominated for the Nebula and the Canadian Aurora Awards. I'm not sure if everybody knows about that one. I have a short story collection called Skin Thief coming out this fall from Neon Hemlock. It's a shapeshifter kind of queer shapeshifter, Trinidadian, Canadian, dark fantasy, horror collection. And so that collection itself has an arc. So it's a shapeshifter collection, and every story sort of has a shapeshifter in it. But as you go through the stories, the characters and the settings also shift gradually. So there's an overall arc. I'm such a nerd about that. I'm like, yeah.
I like
I
it.
don't know if anyone will pick up on it when they read it, but I did that on purpose. I don't know what else to say. I'm a weirdo. I'm a goth. I'm a vampire. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for building Legos. When you, I'm not the only person who says that it looks like you're outside because of the white background and the Legos.
Yeah, it's very bright in here. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I thought they were really cool looking. So, yeah. What about you, Julia?
I am the co-editor of Why Didn't You Just Leave? Nadia and I are doing this together, and I'm very excited to be working with Nadia. She has great taste. She has a vast knowledge of the genre, and I feel like we've been coming up with some really cool stuff. I also write and edit other things, and I also narrate things. So I'm assuming listeners of this podcast, you want to hear about my horror side, because I also have
Absolutely.
a very warm and
Or
fuzzy
any,
side that
we're
is
into all
not
kinds of
horror.
genre stuff, really.
Well, my other editing project is specifically for uplifting science fiction and fantasy. It's like the exact opposite of this. It's called Worlds of Possibility, and you can find everything I do on my website, which is juliarios.com. My probably the dearest horror story that I've written to my heart is called Shtabai, and that was in Shadow Atlas Dark Landscapes of the Americas. That kind of draws on my own experience as a half Mexican person whose father was an immigrant. It's not exactly directly autobiographical, but it draws a lot on my experience, and it was a very cool story to write in a beautiful book that won the Colorado Book Award. Everything in that book is amazing, and you should definitely check it out. It's fully illustrated as well. So that was called Shadow Atlas Dark Landscapes of the Americas. And I've also narrated some horror, and the most recent thing I narrated was for Pseudopod. It was a story by J.A.W. McCarthy called The Only Thing Different Will Be the Body. And it was an incredible story. J.A.W. McCarthy is amazing. So if you like horror and you want to check out cool things that I've done around horror, those are the other things besides this project that I would recommend.
Yeah, and if you guys would do me a favor after the show or sometime today when you get a second, if you guys would email me the best link, because I want to include your best links in the show notes. And so people don't have to look it up, they can just click. My email address is lovecraftezine, easy-ine at gmail.com. So lovecraftezine at gmail. So if you guys will send me that, then I will make sure those links get out there for everybody. So, and you know what? I think I'll include a link to that Kickstarter thing too, Nadia. Is that
Thank
good
you.
marketing?
Thank you.
What a segue. Nadia, I think most people who listen to or watch my podcast know who you are, but you want to introduce yourself
Yeah,
anyway
sure.
for those who don't?
Of course. So I'm Nadia Bulkin. I'm a horror writer based in Washington, D.C. And let's see, I feel like what most people who know me from is my short story collection, She Said Destroy, which is a few years old now, but hopefully there will be another one coming soon. I am also working on, because apparently I have haunted houses on the brain, I have my own haunted house novel that I'm working on right now. So this is like the year of the haunted house for me, and I love it. apparently that's what my brain wants to do. So yeah, and happy to talk about like how this came about, because it's actually a little bit funny, of a funny story. So
Yeah, why don't we start with that?
yeah, sure. So I feel like it's important to like set the stage here with like, this was part of the Twitter collapse. Like Twitter was beginning to collapse, right? This was like last year. And so the social media site du jour was Hive. And I was like, cool, Hive looks really fun. Hive is like all of these writers. That's awesome. And I didn't actually even know Julia, but like literally we had never met. But I made a post, whatever that's called, on Hive, and it was like, you know, I would love to have an anthology that is just called Why Didn't You Just Leave? Because I was like watching horror movies and I looked up the Letterboxd reviews and I knew but it was all going to be like, this is unrealistic because they should have just walked out the door. And Julia replied and was like, I'll do it with you. And I'm like,
I'm roped in now.
I think my first instinct was, I've never done that. I've never edited anything. And I'm scared. But then I literally think I said YOLO in my reply to Julia. And so the project was born. Basically Julia like was persistent in being like, no, you should do it. So yeah, that's my take on it. Julia, what's your take?
Yeah, so the way I remember it happening is almost like that, but it's slightly different. I remember you said like you're watching these movies and they're like, why didn't you just leave? And I would love to see an anthology about this. And I was like, I would edit an anthology about this. This sounds amazing. And you said you should do it. And I said, want to do it with me? Because I was like, it's your idea. You got to be involved. I was like, either you're going to be writing something for it or you're going to be editing it, or both, whatever you want. And then you were like, I don't know, I've never done that before. And then you said YOLO. And suddenly it was a thing that happened literally in the middle of the night on a social media site that I don't know if it even still exists. Yeah.
Because then there was a whole thing about privacy and security, and like everyone left Hive because of that.
Well, and it was down. It just like suddenly went down for like over 3 weeks. And I think at that point I ended up deleting it.
They're all on Threads or Blue Sky now.
But at the time, it was just long enough for me to connect with Nadia, who had this amazing idea, and for us to have the seed of this anthology, and then it grew into what it is, which is
it was totally just fortuitous, like a marvel of the digital age.
So what'd you say, Nadia, that I have to edit this because if I'm not editing it, I won't get to do the Kickstarter?
No. I think what I was thinking was that, hey, why not? You know, it was just kind of, it literally was YOLO for me. It was like, I think I would regret just passing on, you know. And I think it's interesting, right? Because I think as writers, we all sort of struggle with like, what projects do I pass on? What projects do I say, yes, I want to commit my time to this? And it becomes harder and harder, you know. And I think this was a new challenge for me. And so I wanted to take it on for that reason. It was like, yeah, I should try, you know. So yeah, that was my mindset. And then we kind of got together and figured out like who we wanted to invite, and honestly everyone we invited said yes, so that was really awesome. But yeah, and these three were among that first batch that I think we were like both immediately like, oh yeah, these three. So they have been like an awesome pillar from the beginning, and I'm really glad that they can join us here today.
So this question is for everyone, but I want to start with the editors. What do you guys have in mind for the anthology? In other words, like what did you say to the writers? This is what I'm looking for. What did you tell them? And then to the writers here that have a story in the anthology, how did you take that, and how did you what made you want to take that idea and make it into your own and create a story from it? If that question makes sense. So
Yeah,
Sure.
totally.
So Nadia or Julia, whoever wants to start with that.
I mean, I
Okay, go for it. Yeah,
sorry. And you can fill in the blanks.
sure.
I think everything I forget. So I think how I really approached it as kind of like I wanted it to be a metaphor of the difficulties that people face leaving difficult situations. I have a very strong sense of, I don't know, like justice around like the fact that everybody faces different circumstances, and it is not as easy as, you know, I think why didn't you just leave applies to a lot of contexts, you know.
Yeah.
And I personally am a writer who does social political issues, and I was like, a lot of the reasons why people don't leave a haunted house are the same as the reasons why they don't leave any other like dangerous situation. And I wanted to like explore that and highlight that like it's not as simple as you're just saying. So
As
we
it looks from the outside, maybe.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting whenever I ask this question like on social media, most of the first response is always, where am I going to get the money to leave? And I was like, that would probably be my answer too, is like the rent is too damn high to leave, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that there are a bunch of other reasons too, which I think that our writers have explored like a whole lot of different reasons, which is awesome. So yeah, that was like the pitch that we gave to writers was like, you know, let's come up with like an answer that kind of gives people credit for that decision. It's not just because they haven't thought to go to the door and open it, you know. So yeah,
Give them credit for the possibility that maybe they really have considered this, and maybe there are good reasons.
Yeah, and I think we specifically really wanted to explore reasons that people might think everything through and actively choose to stay in a situation that might be horrible and harmful to them. But they have done the internal calculus and they have decided this is the best choice I can make, and it's horrible. Because I think that there are a lot of movies where it seems like, oh, why aren't you just running out of that serial killer basement? Like, why are you going deeper into it? But why do you decide to? And we really wanted to make sure that this anthology was full of different kinds of places, that it wasn't just going to be all, you know, scary gothic mansions, because I think the default that a lot of people think of when they think of a haunted house is like this Victorian mansion that's crumbling or something. And we really wanted to explore like the possibilities of people being haunted in very mundane situations. Like, what about your haunted apartment building?
Right. Well, and in a lot of horror movies, the answer to why didn't you just leave is bad writing, you know. But what if it wasn't? You know, what if there? Yeah, that's intriguing. What about you guys? Whoever wants to take this first of the writers, how did you see this question? And do you want to talk about your story a little bit without spoilers? Don't everybody speak up at once. I'll
try.
All right.
I'll try to jump in because usually I wait until last because I tend to be shy. But so my story is called The Head Harvest, and I kind of took an oppositional tack of starting off with somebody trying to get back into the house. And it's just a very simple premise of kid comes home from college for a winter break or whatever seasonal break, and his key doesn't work and the family's not home, and he looks in the windows and things look different inside. And it sounds pretty boring when I say it like that.
Actually, if you don't mind me interrupting, I was just actually thinking to myself, what an interesting premise, because it takes something so ordinary, kid going home from college, but how creeped out would you feel? How worried would you feel if you looked in the window and everything was different? You know?
I'd be pretty creeped out.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, thank you. You're encouraging. Yeah, I reread it this morning to try to get a to, jog my memory and be prepared. And probably about more than 50% of the story is just not getting into the house. What I was thinking about in writing it in response to the prompt, and it's actually my first haunted house story, I was thinking very much about the house as a symbolic place, like the dollhouse full of models of the family, and the way that, so it's very psychological, and the way we psychologically carry around our different family of origin members, whatever that family might have been like, that they're almost like symbols that live in our heads, like little dolls we carry around. And the haunted house is basically you and me. We all are carrying around our hauntings. So that's a little bit about my thought process in writing.
Who wants to take this next? I did want to add, when you guys, Julia and Nadia, were talking about the genesis of the anthology, I don't want to reduce everything in the world to, the pain pleasure principle, how we move away from pain theoretically and move towards pleasure when we make these decisions. I don't think everything reduces so easily, but that said, there are a lot of decisions in life that if you boil them down, it does reduce to that. So why wouldn't you just leave? Well, maybe it's more painful for them to stay, for them not to stay, than it would be for them to leave. For whatever reason, there's a lot to explore there, So that is to say, I see a lot of possibilities for the anthology, guys. So, Krista, what about your story?
Sorry, I was double muted.
No problem.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, like, how can I talk about it without spoiling it? I don't know that I can, but I don't think it really matters. So I'll just sort of talk freely, and whatever happens, happens.
Sure.
So I've found that, like, I go through stages with short stories. I mentioned my novel before, and that very much, like, it doesn't feel like any of that is really autobiographical, but I find I get into these little ruts with stories where, like, I just have a hard time, like, taking a prompt and not coming at it from a very personal place. So, I kind of, like, saw the prompt, and I instantly was just like, well, what would be a reason why I would not leave a haunted house? And what's the first thing that comes to mind? Like, maybe I can brainstorm off of that. And I have a young daughter, she's 3, and this past year was the first year that she went to school. And she, obviously she came home with like 8 million colds. It was like cold after cold after cold, and everyone in my house was coughing and sick constantly. And it's a little cliche, but, like, it is true. Like, it was my first time really experiencing, like, I really wish I could take that cold from you and, like, just have it myself, especially when she was even younger. It was like, you don't even really understand what's going on, and I wish I could just take that from you. And so I started thinking about that perspective, like, maybe somebody doesn't leave a haunted house because they want to take on the pain of the haunted house for somebody else, and they're willing to sort of like
Nice.
make that sacrifice willingly, and almost a little bit like manically enjoyable, where it's just like, I know that on like an intellectual level, I know that this sucks, but I'm fine with it because I don't want it for this other person. So I'm just gonna sit in it, literally sit in it, and watch the teapot smash against the wall and the ooze slime down the walls, and I'm just gonna revel in it because better me than her.
You're willing to get slimed by what's his name in Ghostbusters?
Yeah.
Ghost and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think any good parent can relate to the first part of what you said. My son just turned 21, and I still think that sometimes when he gets sick, much less when he was younger. Wish I could take that off you and just experience it myself so that you didn't have to. The first part of what you said, I had a friend who, whenever he would talk about writing, he would always say bleed on the page. And you made me think of that when you talked about just relating it to yourself. And I think that's a
Yeah,
great place to
yeah.
come from. Yeah.
Yeah, I do find like it's weird. It's just some stories, it's just like there's no escaping it for me. Like it's just so much of myself comes out of it. And then some other ones, you know, are there's more distance and I'm like just exploring something that I'm interested in. But yeah, it's most of the time it's like very hard to separate the me from certain parts of characters within.
Well, and I think the readers, they feel that and they connect with it perhaps
Yeah,
more.
absolutely.
Yeah. So what about you, Susan?
What about me? Okay, so my story is called Good Company. I'm like Krista in that I tend to write about things, not necessarily things that I've experienced always personally, but things that I can relate to emotionally. Um, in this case, Good Company, it's about a person who is I don't necessarily name the country or the place, but you can assume it's a Western place, probably Canada or the United States, and they've come on a caregiver visa, which is a thing that exists. I did some research on it, and also where I've grown up in Canada, because I live in Toronto or just outside of Toronto. I live in I've always lived in immigrant communities because I am an immigrant. And so a lot of people who I've lived with growing up, even extended members of my family, have come over here undocumented. So they've come over and they've gotten jobs that are below the table and had to stay and work, and they couldn't really leave those situations because there is nowhere that you can really go, because if you go somewhere they can report you and you'll get sent back to wherever you're from. So that is something that I know people who have done that, or people in my extended family have done that. So it's something that's quite close to me. And so we immigrated from Trinidad when I was a child. And so I've sort of set my character as a Trinidadian person who has come over on a visa and to caretake for someone, an older person who is very wealthy. And she's doing it because she wants to have a better life for herself and her child. And I don't usually write mom stories, so I've written a few mother stories. So she comes over and she's taken this job, and it's a great job with lots of money and a room and all this stuff. And when she gets here, the responsibilities are a little bit more horrific than she anticipated, but she can't leave because you can't just, when you're on such a type of visa, you can't just pick up and leave. Because if you do, you're in violation of your visa requirements. So she has to stay and put up with it if she wants to bring her family over later. That's basically what it is. And I'm a big fan of the movie His House. I think you guys mentioned it in the. I'm a huge fan of that movie and just the way that story plays out. And also, another movie I really like is I think it's called The Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. I Am the
I
Pretty
am the
Thing
pretty
That Lives
thing
in the
that lives in
House.
the
I
house.
love that movie and how she's doing a job and she's taking care of someone, and it's so dreadful and terrifying. So I kind of took um inspiration from those. That was a lot. I said all at
I'm
once.
glad you mentioned His House, because I feel like there's been a few movies recently that kind of touch on the themes, like that, remind me of your story. Have you seen The Nanny or Nocebo? If not, you should check both of those out.
I still need to see that because I know that you really liked it.
Yeah, because they're really good. Yeah, and anyway, very much in line with Susan's story.
You know what, as she was talking, I haven't seen it yet, but I know the bare bones of what it's about. Adam Neville's story, it's on Netflix. Watch, let's see, No One Gets Out Alive.
Yeah, we referenced that on the Kickstarter too.
Oh, did you really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? Is that good?
Oh yeah, it's great.
All right, I still need to see that too.
I wouldn't reference it if it was bad, Mike.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. So what kind of awards do you have on the Kickstarter. I got it in front of me. Do you want to talk about those, Nadia or Julia or both?
I hand that to Julia because Julia is the Kickstarter maven among us.
So yes, we do have a variety of rewards. Right now, we've got ebook and paperback, obviously, for Why Didn't You Just Leave? And there are still a few Cursed Morsels bundles that our publisher, Cursed Morsels Press, is offering. Those are limited and a few of them have already gone. So like if you want them, you should get them soon. That gives you all of the books that Cursed Morsels has published, including Why Didn't You Just Leave, in both ebook and paperback. And then there are a few single author bundles where you get the ebook and paperback of Why Didn't You Just Leave and a signed edition of a book by one of our authors. Unfortunately, the people in this podcast who are offering that, aside from me, are all gone because people have already snapped up the Susan Palumbo deal and the Krista Carmen deal and the Nadia Bulkin deal. If you want two books that I have signed for you, I have a science fiction collection that I edited with Alana Jolie Abbott called Bridge to Elsewhere. Some of those stories are more uplifting and some of them are very dark indeed. So you kind of get a mix with that one. And then there's another book that has a story that I wrote in it, which does have a ghost in it. But I wouldn't call it horror. However, it's more kind of magical realism. And you can get that bundle if you want. There's also a bundle from Tanya Ransom, including her novel Risen, or her novella Risen. There's a bundle from Max Booth III, including his collection Abnormal Statistics. And there are also art rewards, including postcards of the internal illustrations. We got Luke Spooner to illustrate Krista Carmen's story, and it's so cool. And we also have, yes, I showed it to Krista.
Okay,
I was like, Krista, you need to see the illustration for your story. Here it is. We also have Eve Tourigny doing an illustration for Max Booth III's story. And if the campaign goes really well and we overfund, we might even fund a couple more illustrations, but that depends on how things go. I also designed personally 3 spooky stickers, which I used stock art, but I made the designs. They're a headstone that says, "Why didn't you just leave?" A ghost that says, "Boo." And another that's my personal favorite is a bowl of cereal called Ghostios with a little ghost rising out of the bowl. You can get all of those if you want, in either individually as add-ons or as part of a bundle with the book, and that's the Cursed Art Bundle. That's what we have going on now. Oh, except I didn't mention, Nadia, do you want to talk about the big rewards?
Yes, okay, big rewards. So first off, Julie and I are offering some like one-on-one time essentially. So if you want to get your story critiqued by me, that's an option. If you want to chat with Julie about writing and publishing, that's an option. So we are hoping that some folks take us up on that offer. They are limited because, you know, there's limited time in the world, but you know, that's okay. And
yeah, Paul was just talking about how insanely talented you are. I don't know if you saw the last Ezine podcast or the one before last, but he was talking about, you know, she's so young and she has all this figured out before us old people who have to wait till we're old to figure out
I'm
this
becoming old.
writing stuff. Yeah, right.
Anyway,
What are you, like 25?
please. Anyway,
No, but yeah, he really was. He was like, she's really talented. So, you know, this, my point is, consultation with you means something. So
yeah, I actually love reviewing other people's work. So yeah, so those are 2 options. And then we have our sort of like mega big options, which are we've got connected with a paranormal investigator who is willing to do like basically a seminar, for like a Zoom seminar for us and some lucky folks, where we'll actually talk about like ghost hunting and, you know, how to contact the other side and all this other stuff.
oh wow,
and
that's cool.
it's so cool. And
Yeah.
what's really cool about that one is that it's accessible from like all over the world essentially, right? So like we know that we probably, you know, we have friends and fans and associates all over, right? And the problem with sometimes some of these like larger awards is like it requires you to go somewhere, and we wanted to make sure that we had something that was like globally accessible.
Yeah.
So this is our globally accessible one, and we're both really, really excited about it because she seems really cool and has, you know, like truly encountered things. So we are really hoping that we can get that one because I think just people would love it. So that's an awesome one.
That's a really cool idea. Will this person, will they be talking about, you know, what they've done and telling stories, or is it a how-to, or is it both?
I think it's all of the above, and I
Okay.
think that we can kind of shape it, but I think I'm
Right.
envisioning all of the above. Yeah.
Okay. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And then our last large award is the one that is in person. And basically, if you want to spend a haunted weekend or time with Julia and I, we are offering a chance to do that in some spooky location in Salem, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So if anybody, you know, is like can't get enough of us, definitely check that reward out. So yeah, so those are our kind of like big, fun, crazy rewards.
How will that one work? It's just like, you said in some crazy haunted location. What do you mean exactly?
We're not entirely sure where we're going to pick it.
Yeah, that one is still being formed, and it
It's
kind
still
of depends
manifesting
also on whether people get it.
Right.
And once we know the number of people who have gotten it and things, we can kind of tailor it. But basically, you'll have to get yourself to Salem, Massachusetts. We promise you that we will both be there. Possibly we will have some special guests, and there will be some kind of haunted experience with us that you can do. This, whether that's like one-on-one time with a ghost tour person in our own private tour, and then we get to ask questions, or whether we're actually staying in a haunted place, that remains to be seen, and it kind of will depend on how this works out, but it will be a special, cool thing that we're only going to do the one time. The other one is a much like, so that reward, that big haunted experience, is the $500 reward. Like you're helping subsidize this novel in a big
Right.
way, or this collection in a big way. But the other reward with the paranormal investigator webinar situation, we wanted that to be accessible to a lot of people. So if you buy the reward tier level on its own, it gives you the ebook, the paperback, all the art rewards, and then that webinar for $100. But if you didn't want to spend that much, but you really want to attend the webinar, we did add it in as an add-on for $50. And you can basically get a copy of the book or one of the postcards or something, and then pay the $50 add-on fee, or you could even just get like the ebook and then do the $50 add-on. So you don't necessarily have to spend $100 to get that time with a paranormal investigator. If you choose it though, we're going to be surveying all the people who chose it to find out what you want it to be. And she's willing to talk about her experiences. She's willing to she's also a medium, so she's willing to talk about mediumship. If you're a writer and you have any questions about hauntings, mediums, paranormal investigation, if you've just ever wanted to experience it, if you are dealing with hauntings and you want tips for how to deal with them better, this is for you, and you can make it whatever you want it to be. So I'm really excited. I hope people take us up on this because I want to experience it and hear all about it.
This makes me kind of curious to ask all six of you this question. What are your beliefs as far as the paranormal and the supernatural go? Whoever wants to start with this. Don't everybody speak up at once.
I'll start. So I have always been drawn to ghosts and ghost stories ever since I can remember. But I've also had experiences where I lived in a house for a while that was, it was very haunted. I don't know how else to describe it. And it was when I was in college, I was dating a young man, and his parents' house was the house that it was. But I would sometimes go and stay with them. And the room that I was allegedly supposed to sleep in was this small room in the back of the house. But it was kind of impossible to sleep in there because of the things that would happen. For instance, the lights would turn on and off a lot just by themselves. And it's hard to get a full night's sleep if you think you're going to be in darkness and then suddenly at 2 a.m. the light turns on overhead and is just blinding you. But that would happen a lot. And you would just get a really weird feeling. Sometimes it would be cold, etc. That part of the house, all of the other bedrooms were upstairs. So I would be the only person downstairs. And I would often kind of migrate into the living room and sleep on the couch instead. But the house had landlines. This was back in the time before everybody just used cell phones as a default. And there was a phone upstairs. I think there were two phones upstairs, one in an office and one in the parents' bedroom. And then there was one phone downstairs in the kitchen. And these were all connected to the same line. So theoretically, if the phone rang, it should have rung on all the phones. But every morning around 6 or 6:30 a.m., the downstairs kitchen phone would ring quietly, like not the same volume as it would normally ring. And if you picked it up, there would just be dead air, nothing there. But it would kind of ring quietly and insistently until you picked it up. So like it would go on for a few minutes. Like if you didn't pick it up, it would go on for a while. If you did pick it up, there would just be nothing there. And I would kind of like get to the point where if I was staying over there, I'd be like, oh, it's the phone ringing. As I pick it up, like, hello, ghost. Yeah, okay, well, I'm gonna hang up now. Good morning. So that sort of thing happening. I feel like everybody who lived in that house really, no one could come up with alternate explanations for some of the things that happened. And it could have alternate explanations, but I really kind of feel like, no, that seems like ghosts.
Well, the other part of this is you're the only one on the, you said the first level of the house, right? And everybody else is upstairs. That's spooky enough.
Yeah.
I well remember when I was a little kid, and this was late 70s. We stayed in a house where we lived in a house, excuse me, where I had a bedroom on the first floor, and I had a sister and two parents, and they were all upstairs. And I could never figure out why I had to be the one downstairs. But each night I would go to bed just petrified because I was the only one on that level, So yeah, that's bad enough. And then you add all the spooky elements that you're talking about, Julia. So yeah. Who else wants to field this?
I'll oh, sorry, go ahead, Joe. My answer is pretty quick and simple. I'm sort of this like weird, I completely don't believe in anything and I completely believe in it 100%. I guess I'm like very open to being proven wrong, but like I have just this like annoyingly rational and like cynical part of me where it's just like, well, you haven't seen anything and no one's seen anything that's like really proof. But I think the key there is like that side of me annoys me. Like I don't want to be like that. I want to like embrace it because I love all of the aspects of like hauntings and ghosts and spiritualism and seances, and I'm just very open to it, but I'm like there's just this part of my brain that's this like wall that nothing really can get over.
Yeah. Well, that there's not necessarily bad. I have something similar where I'm very fascinated by the paranormal and the supernatural and all that sort of thing, but at the same time I'm a skeptic. But I'm not in the sense that I poo-poo the whole thing. It's just more like I'll believe anything as long as there's evidence for it. If there's not, I'll be like, yeah, that's interesting. And if someone says, well, do you believe it or not, I'll be like, well, I don't know. And it's okay to say I don't know. So yeah, something similar. Joe,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what were you gonna say, Joe?
Oh, mostly that I'm really curious about things. And so I'm the person, if we're like at a campfire or it's late at night, I'm going to be like, tell me a ghost story, you know, like a real one that you've experienced. So I haven't really experienced it myself. And I think that's really interesting that there's a level of subjectivity to a haunting where people might have stayed in the same house as Julia and not experienced the things, like the phone ringing and so on. Like you have to be the right person for the haunting to really happen.
Yeah,
It makes me think of
definitely possible.
Shirley Jackson's novel, The Haunting of Hill House, which is kind of the perfect haunted house story. It's very unclear, the ambiguity between whether the main character is causing the haunting or whether it's objectively the house itself. And I
Yeah,
think that's kind of how it is in real life. So
yeah, I think all of you might be interested in this. I do a Halloween episode every year, and you know Jeff Thomas and Scott Thomas, right, Nadia? They're very much into the paranormal. They're writers. They're very much into the paranormal as well, and they tell me these ghost stories. They lived in 2 different haunted houses growing up, and they're just really fascinating to listen to. So I love hearing about it, as you said, Joe. Who else wants to take this? What are your thoughts on the paranormal? Yeah, Susan.
So I think I come at this from a different angle, and I think it's because I'm from a non-Western culture, because I'm from the Caribbean. It was like I never had a choice. My parents didn't give me a choice not to believe in things. So, for example, like I love what everyone's saying, and I experience it too because I live here, so I can function in both. But for us, the paranormal doesn't exist separately or doesn't break into your reality ever. It always exists. So, for example, as a child, we have a folkloric character called the Sukunyant, which is a derivative of a long time ago French vampire in the Caribbean. And so it isn't a question, like we don't grow up with the question of, does this vampire exist? Like we don't have that. It's just, it does exist. It's somewhere, and you may encounter her or you may not. And everybody knows that story. And so I feel like I was deprived of having the choice of whether to believe in things or not.
Yeah.
I just had to, these things exist. And so the woman down the street could be this lady. I don't know what she's doing. And so that's how I grew up. And when I was a child, this is so weird. I had such a weird childhood. When I was a child, my mother was convinced that this Sukunyant vampire was coming into the house and sucking her blood. And she woke up a couple days or a couple times with bruises. And I was probably about 6 or 7 at the time. And she's like, "Oh my God, look, I'm sorry. Oh my, I have these bruises." And it's gotta be that. And she didn't go to another reason of, oh, maybe I got elbowed while I was sleeping, or maybe I hit my arm. And so it was full out launch, our entire family, extended family saying, "Oh no, the vampire is getting in your house." And so, my father at the time, who I lived with at the time, he put up crosses everywhere. And they put salt on the windows. So I was terrified and they were all just like, matter of fact, we got to stop this vampire from coming in.
Part of
And they
life.
just
Yeah.
put me to sleep. Right. So
Yeah.
I know as an adult that this probably doesn't exist, but this internal primal sort of fear of things because the world is porous for me, and there is no line between what happens. Like Joe was saying, some people may experience it and some people may not, but it exists. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when you grow up in a situation as a child, that for you is reality. If your parents and the adults in your life are saying, you know, they're being very matter of fact of this exists, this is real. Why would you second guess it? You're just going to grow up thinking, like as you said, Susan, there is no line between paranormal and the normal. It's just all one thing. I guess the second thing I would like to say is I'm becoming more and more aware as an American. I'm becoming more and more aware that there are plenty of places in the world where people do grow up like this. I saw you nodding a lot, Nadia, when Susan was talking about this, and I'm becoming more and more aware of it, and it's very interesting. And it's, you know,
Yeah.
It's not easy to throw that off. You know, not saying you should throw it off, but it's not easy to throw off how you grew up when you're an adult, for sure. So
I guess I'll kind of like quickly round us out.
sure.
I am very similar, like as Susan. Like I grew up in Indonesia, and so I grew up with a very similar kind of vibe, where it's just presumed that there are ghosts, there are evil spirits. I remember like the most like my parents were both atheists who like pretended to be religious, but they were very clearly atheists. And you know, when we were like driving down this like towards this beach that's like owned by the Queen of the South Sea, who's a spiritual queen. You know, she's not well, she's not human. And she will kill anyone who wears the color green. And my mom at the time was wearing like a turquoise shirt, and my dad was like, why are you wearing that color? You know, and she's like, what? Oh, this is fine, don't worry. But my mom's the white woman. My dad's the Indonesian man. And he's like, oh my God, like why? Like, you know where this is, like why would you do this? And like, did my mother get drowned? No, but she did get food poisoning. So, you know, I conclude that that is the Queen of the South Sea. Anyway, so like that's the environment I grew up in. I have never experienced anything myself, nor do I want to all the ghosts in the world, because I'm very much like unlike Krista, I am not open to having my mind changed. I would like to live in a state of agnostic, not knowing forever. But I also love hearing ghost stories like Joe. And I mean, all my podcasts are like true scary story podcasts told by the people who like live through it. That's like my genre. My
You'll be
mother,
visited by the ghost of Kickstarter's past, Nadia.
no, my mother had experienced a haunting when she was a young American studying dance in Indonesia, renting a house in the middle of nowhere in the jungle.
Yeah, I've seen that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, and she was like teaching English to be able to pay rent, you know, and basically her best friend was like, I'm gonna, you know, like make the house nice and like put some incense and whatever. And my mom was like, I don't know. But so her best friend did that. And then my mom woke up in the middle of the night in the room where the incense had been lit, to a white pillar in the room shaking the bed that my mother was in. And she basically just like went into a catatonic state until it went away. Never happened again. But years later, they would return to that village randomly and asked about what happened to the house, because the house was no longer there. And apparently it had been like taken down. But a previous owner was buried in that underneath where my mother was sleeping. So
Wow.
yes. And so my mother didn't tell me that until later in my life, but she would later say like, this is why I hated watching horror movies with you, because it like that stuff is real to me and it is scary to me, you know.
But at the same time, she's an atheist.
Yeah.
No, I'm not making fun of it. I'm trying to correlate it.
Yeah, so I want to just jump in here and say, like, I kind of have both, because I also have the white mother who grew up in a very Anglo-American household, and then my Mexican father, immigrant. And the Mexican culture, again, like the Caribbean and like Indonesia, is very open about spirits being just part of life. So you don't think twice about it. It's not even necessarily scary. You could be like, oh, I see these things. This tells me that my grandmother's spirit is here. Then there are the scary things that are like, oh, I've seen this owl. It's clearly the witch spirit. They're going to come and kill us. And you hope you don't see it. But for what Joe was saying, it's not even just the same person could experience it while someone else couldn't. It's that two people can experience the same thing, but you can interpret it differently. You can interpret the light turning on and off by itself as a ghost, or as there must be something faulty in the wiring. And I was definitely not the only person who experienced all the things that happened in that house. I actually met up with the whole family a few years ago, when I attended my ex's wedding, because we're still in good terms. And when I met up with his mother and his brother, they were like, man, remember that house? And we all just started telling all of our like spooky experiences to each
Oh,
other.
wow.
And it was just sort of like a nice little cathartic time to remind each other that we had all experienced the same things. And all of us were like, oh, do you remember when this happened? And everybody was like, yeah. There's this connection there because you had to have experienced it to really understand how it felt. But also, again, if you come into that situation and you're Krista and you don't want to believe in any of this because mentally you just don't want to deal with this, you have a protective wall up, that's very strong. So you could live in that house and you could be like, well, my phone's broken and it rings every morning at 6:30 for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay to say I don't know as well. That's all right too. So, um, what other questions did I have? I know I wanted to ask the editors about the other stories. If you could briefly, I know it'd take time to go over all of them, so I'm not asking that, but maybe just talk about a few of the others real quick. I know you have this on the Kickstarter too.
Sure.
Well, actually, let me read this real quick, and then you can fill in the blanks. I really like this. What's inside? We've invited today's most exciting horror authors to show us what happens when leaving isn't an option. Here's a peek at some of the stories we've already received. The world ended there. Alberto Chamal, is that right? In the aftermath of her teenage daughter's murder, a grieving mother refuses to leave the family home even as the family falls apart. Good Company by Suzanne Palumbo talked about that one. An immigrant takes a job as companion in the home of an old woman only to find that the companionship requirements are more sinister than she realized. Spirit Bed by Eden Royce. A woman learns that one person's dream is truly another person's nightmare when she searches for a means to rescue her sister from a state of perpetually haunted sleep. And The Head Harvest by Joe Koch. Am I saying your last name right, Joe? Okay, good. A university student returns to his toxic home environment against everyone's better judgment with mind-bending consequences. I can't wait to find out what happens in that story, Joe. So I look forward to reading all of these stories. What about some of the others to the editors? You want to talk about those briefly?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think we can mention a couple.
Sure.
Max Booth the third's story, which is the other story we're having illustrated, is called AITA, Am I the Asshole? For setting my dad's trailer on fire. It's about a young woman who returns home after her mother dies and finds out that the state of her parents' home is terrible. It's a hoarding situation, but that's actually the least of her problems. So
That's great. My son told me about that website. He's read me a few of those things. It's hilarious.
it's a really powerful story. It's very quick to read, but also extremely just horrifying and disturbing, but in a great way.
Right.
Disturbing is the word I would use.
Horrifying and disturbing in a great way.
In a great way.
But every horror reader knows exactly what you mean, and writer.
Joe's story, I just want to say, like, the thing that's not really come through that I think is the thing that makes Joe's story so interesting is just that it is written in such a way that you kind of lose your sense of stability at the same time that the university student who's coming home. So it's a very mind-bending, surrealist story. And I think that that is the thing that stands out to me, is it's very atmospheric, and the mood and the way it's written just kind of makes you lose your grip on reality. What is happening?
Yeah.
And I love that. Another story that I would mention that we don't have in the descriptions yet is Raquel Castro. So Alberto Chimal and Raquel Castro are both Mexican writers, and I'm actually translating their stories into English from Spanish. And her story is again about a woman who goes home after the death of a relative. And home is kind of a loose thing here. She goes to a family house after the death of a relative and encounters a lot of spooky things there. Both Raquel and Alberto have set their stories in Mexico. So they're actually very different kinds of stories in different parts of Mexico and different levels of class and different things there. Alberto's is much more about a working class family dealing with the trials and tribulations of not having a lot of money and living in a place where there is a lot of violence and gangs and things like that. And Raquel's is much more about spooky family situations that might happen to someone who has more money, but it turns out you still don't get to escape necessarily having
Right.
scary situations.
Right. Yeah. Nadia, do you want to talk about a few?
I think that actually covers the ones that we are ready to talk about at this point. There's just a few that are like still churning in the works that I don't want to speak out of turn of like what they're gonna,
Yeah, understood.
not as baked, but hopefully we will be able to share as soon as we can updates on those. And the other thing I want to make sure to mention is that we're having an open submissions call in August, and we are hoping to basically round out the other half of the anthology with stories from all over, everyone in the world. And so we're really excited. Julie and I are really excited, and felt it was very important to do that, to have, half and bite, half open. So
I
we're
like
really, so we're really excited.
How many stories are you hoping for, Nadia?
I mean, originally we were thinking like 20 or so, but I mean, I think it's the numbers will, it kind of depends on like how long some of the other stories are and all those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, we should be able to get quite a few from the submissions call. And I know that like people have already, commented, being like, oh, I'm writing a story on this, like, oh, I'm like inspired by this idea, I'm doing this now. And I'm like, I really hope that you get to submit this because I want to read it. So yeah.
Well, I really think that this is an anthology that needs to happen. It's such a great idea, really. It's a thought that every one of us have had watching horror movies, and hopefully not reading too many horror stories, but those too. I mean, it's like the question about, the woman who's being abused by her partner. It's very easy to say, well, geez, why don't you just leave? Well, maybe there are some good reasons why she can't. And the same applies to, as this anthology, The Haunted House. So what, I guess the last question I have, what is the range? You mentioned that it's not just about crumbling Gothic mansions. Of course, sometimes it's an apartment. Or what's sort of the gambit, would you say, of the range? I mean, you have, in other words, if I said to you, what kind of locations do you have in this anthology? Do you have apartments? Do you have this? Do you have that?
I would say they're all pretty modern, just in terms of like, contemporariness, which I think is great because it takes us out of the Gothic mansion thing. We have houses, we have like, I guess, suburban and city dwellings. We have a prison. So that's
There's a good reason why the person didn't leave.
Right. Very good reason.
Exactly.
And yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll have apartments. I know that in these submissions we're going to have apartments and group houses, which I as somebody who lives in a group house, I want to see stories about haunted group houses because that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
really
I
want to
would
help.
say that
Go
we
ahead.
do
I'm
have.
sorry, Julia.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. We have everything from the trailer of Max Booth's story to Raquel's story. It takes place in a casona, which is like a big house on the outskirts of town. So that's kind of like the closest we have to the Gothic mansion. But again, it's a very contemporary story. It's not the Gothic mansion story you're thinking. And then you have like all of the things in between, and then also prisons. And I know people are going to send us all kinds of other awesome locations.
Well, I really look forward to reading these. And as I say, it's a really unique idea. And it's one I want to, I want to see happen. So visit the Kickstarter. You can Google Kickstarter and why didn't I just leave? Or you can just look at my show notes. I'll have the link to the Kickstarter in the show notes. You can just click those. If you guys will send me your best links, I'll include those as well in the show notes. And why don't we close with all of you, like, just real quick, tell the audience about your latest project or your upcoming project so people can check out your work while they're waiting for the anthology to come out. So if they didn't jot it down the first time, they can do so now. So Krista, let's start with you.
Sorry, my trigger
Oh,
finger of double muting is so slow. I'm out of
you're fine.
practice. So my novel, The Daughters of Block Island, is coming out on December 1st. Obviously, this anthology, I have a couple other anthologies that I'll give you the link. They'll be available on my website that are coming out this year. And then I have a new short story in the latest issue of Vastirian that will be coming out, I think, in the next week. So that's a pretty recent one.
They're doing a great job with that publication.
Yes.
They really are. Susan.
So my short story collection, Skin Thief, comes out at the end of September. That's the date I have.
Okay.
I also have a story coming out in Wilted Pages, that anthology, and also another one from Beyond Hemlock, the Crawling Moon anthology. This is the year of anthologies for me. So you can find me there. Next year I'll have a novella out, but that is a space opera. It's a little bit spooky, but not very. So
Well, I find that people who listen to my show aren't just horror fans and aren't just cosmic horror fans or weird fiction fans. They're into comics, they're into science fiction, all kinds of genre stuff. Yeah. So, Joe.
Yeah, as stated before, I have a limited edition chapbook called The Shipwreck of the Cerberus that you can get only through me, through my website. So I'll send you the link for that.
Wait, say that again real quick. I will have the link in there, but the link is what again?
Horrorsong.blog.
Okay, all right.
And like Susan, I have quite a few short stories coming out, and I always get stuck on which ones can I talk about and which ones are still secret. But I do have a story in the anthology Never Wake, coming out through Crystal Lake, edited by Kenneth Kane and Tim Meyer.
Oh, Ken's a great guy. I know Ken.
Wonderful guy. He was sent me a very kind rejection years and years ago, like around 2015 when I started writing. And I've always remembered that. Like it encouraged me, even though it was rejection. But so it was really a privilege to work with him finally. I've obviously, this anthology I'm thrilled about being part of. I'm sure there's a few others, and I probably have a lot of announcements coming up. So
you usually announce those on your blog typically?
Always, yeah. I don't do a lot of
there.
just rambling storytelling, just announcements when things come out. So
sure,
they can follow me there.
Well, I know Nadia's collection, she said Destroy. Anything else you want to mention, Nadia?
So I think my most recent short story / novelette, I have one in No Trouble at All, which was published by Cursed Morsels. I think that's shipped out this spring. That's kind of like it's basically a demon possession. It's actually the wrong person who's possessed story.
It happens. Ghosts make mistakes too.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the ghost making the mistake. It's the fundamentalist Christian group that's making the
Oh,
mistake.
they make a lot of those.
Exactly. And then I also have a body horror novelette in Little Mutilations, which was published by Crystal Lake. And that one's about a beauty pageant contestant who starts discovering holes all over her body. So that's my most recent publications that I can talk about.
And last but not least, Julia, you want to mention yours again real quick?
Sure. So if you want the exact opposite, you've scared yourself too much and you want a unicorn chaser, you can check out Worlds of Possibility. Those are always meant to make you leave it feeling either hopeful, happy, or peaceful. So no scary things there. Although I am planning for the October issue coming up that there will be some things around grief, grieving, ghosts, etc. So even though it's hopeful and happy, you can still touch on these subjects. And if you want horror, you should definitely pick up Shadow Atlas, Dark Landscapes of the Americas. It is fully illustrated and amazing. And I do have my story Shabai in there. And if you want to listen to me read you some horror, check out the Pseudopod episode for J.W. McCarthy's story. The only thing different will be the body, because that story is incredible.
They had just been doing that a long time, haven't they? Pseudopod?
Yeah.
Really long time. Yeah. Well, listen, everyone, thank you for chatting with me about the anthology and about your stories and your work. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us on.
Oh,
Yes,
sure. And,
thank
you
you.
know, to the audience, look, I think you guys know that I don't really promote very many Kickstarters, but I think this one really deserves to fund. So, you know, please get behind it and let's make it happen. It's a really original idea. So, and I want to read these stories anyway. So selfishly, let's make this fund. So thanks guys for being here. And, you know, and I'll probably have this video up within a day, Nadia, and the audio up within 2 to 3 days, but I'll keep you posted about that.
Awesome.
So,
and thanks again, Mike.
oh, no problem.
Thank you so much, Mike. This has been
sure.
wonderful.
No problem. And you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. Everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you.
Bye.